we wanted to pick up one statement just to kind of kick off on this part, and it's Jesus Christ saying, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death," and like incredible statement from anybody. It's one of those kind of shocking, like, it really is. How can you express sorrow deeper than that? But particularly for coming from Jesus. I mean, occasionally he will use hyperbole as a teaching technique, but generally it's like straight, understated. The Gospels themselves, even in this narrative, it's like many people raised from the dead. It's like a side detail. They don't, we want all the details and the thing. But Jesus says this. It's an incredible statement, isn't it?
Yeah, and it kind of, you think, wow, like Jesus only speaks truth. So it's an accurate assessment of his own soul. To have so much sorrow in it. I mean, his soul is going to be like the strongest soul any human could ever have. There's so much sorrow that's just pouring into it. He's overflowing, and I think this could genuinely kill me from this sorrow. And I don't know, obviously it's not something you can picture, but I picture it like you have your heart and there's a capacity within it for a certain amount of hardship.
Yeah.
And it's like this sort of blackness floods into you. And most of us discover actually that what we thought was our limit, there's an incredible resilience about humanity, isn't there? We can go beyond that. But Jesus knows all of that. And then he's like, but the amount of this is just, I'm literally on the point of death. Like, this is the maximum sorrow that I as a human being could cope with. And it's like, wow. Like, just first of all, it's like, okay, as somebody who I follow and love, that means a lot to me that he would be at that place. I want it to mean more to me.
Yeah.
The empathy or the sympathy I'd feel for him. But another part of me is like, why? Why is he so sorrow-filled? What on earth could have caused him? Like, he's kind of gone through most of his life dealing and seeing lots of pain, seeing lots of suffering. He knows what's in a man. So why is he so overwhelmed with sorrow? So I don't know what you think about that, but...
Yeah, I mean, it's making me think, again, I mean, one of the themes that's maybe come out over the episodes that we've done, without kind of navel-gazing or being overly self-flagellating, but it's kind of the weaknesses of our own tradition.
Yeah.
And so last week we talked about, the theology of absence. And here we're kind of into an example of sorrow. And it is an emotion that the charismatic church isn't particularly comfortable with. I don't think. I mean, we only like to mention sorrow when it's turned into dancing. And yet, and I'm not an expert on this at all, but, other traditions, they dwell on this stuff a lot more. You think about something like the Catholic Stations of the Cross.
Yeah.
And they put people in front of these realities. And I mean, we could spend a long time thinking about, well, when God came to earth, when love invaded, one of the reactions of love coming to this place was he was overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. And there is that empathy of, oh my gosh, somebody that I love and follow, that happened to them, I don't feel good. And there is also this strange comfort of, boy, I've been to some dark places, and he's been there, and even more so, and knowing the strength of his soul. So it's not kind of easy, gimme, light, hey, here's a little pick-me-up.
Yeah.
But it is something that, we think about it quite a lot, don't we? A church of however many people in front of you on a Sunday morning. And that some people have been through a great week and other people have had the most horrific news they're going to receive in their life. And sometimes you can feel like, oh gosh, what have we got to give them? but actually there's something in here that people can draw from.
And if nothing less than what you're saying, which is that they can come to a place where they know that the King of our faith looked on their sorrow, their suffering, and he understood it to such an extent that he was almost overwhelmed. So there's part of that. That's part of the answer, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, God saw what the world was really like,
Yeah.
and it just broke his heart.
Yeah.
So, I mean, part of that is what we see Jesus saying. We saw in the last section about Jerusalem. And we talked a lot last time about, he kind of gives them parables and the sheep and the goat and the parable of the vineyard, and he kind of, there's this sense of he's coming to bring upon them a really bad bit of news. But what we didn't major on so much last time, it just wasn't time, was that he weeps. And I think part of the sorrow that Jesus has in Gethsemane is like, it's just, he sees the state of the world and he just weeps and weeps and weeps. He's like, I loved these people. I knit them together in their mother's womb. I created them for joy and fullness. And look at what they're going through.
Yeah.
And whether it's of their own making or someone else's making, is almost at this moment, it's like, this is just a sorrow. It's just so much sorrow.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's really clearly one of them. The other sort of, you can sort of then see specifically that it must be hard that you choose 12 people to be your main men, and one of them sells you out for the price of, in those days was, if somebody killed a slave, you gave them 30 pieces of silver for not much money.
Yeah.
I mean, that must be hurt. I've had moments where I felt a slight bit of betrayal, but never anything like that. And then to feel like the other 11, he's just told them, he's just had dinner with them, Last Supper, and he says, like, I'm going to be struck and you guys are just all going to fall away.
Yeah.
And I've had moments in my life where I think I've worked, maybe even COVID, you've worked for years for something, you've given yourself fully, you've invested in people, and then it just doesn't, you kind of think it's all crumbling.
Yeah.
And that's part of the frustration of the curse in Genesis, which is you'll work hard and it won't always yield results.
Yeah.
And there's sorrow in that, isn't there?
Yeah.
So Jesus is feeling the sorrow of the curse, the reality of, you guys, many of you would have worked super hard for something, and in the end, it felt like it came to nothing, and that genuinely creates sorrow.
Yeah.
So there's three sort of very much like, all humans can feel this, and he feels it to a great extent. But I think there is the fourth source of his sorrow, which is maybe the most significant source of his sorrow, which is the cup, which Jesus says, if you're able to take this cup from me, then I'd like you to, but your will be done. And so what Jesus is really saying is that in this moment of sorrow, a lot of the sorrow that he's actually taking is, he talks about like a cup of like this filthy stuff that he's pouring, and that's the sorrow. And that is a cup that's been put in his hand by his Father. And he has chosen to take up.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, the whole of the Trinity is collaborating in this. It's not one part of the Trinity doing it to another part of the Trinity. They're all together, but there's this draining of the cup. And so what is that cup? And we see in the other Gospels, not so much in Matthew, but almost certainly it's the cup of the wrath of God. And so the Catholic tradition would maybe be responsible for something like Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ, and he talks about the cross, or he shows the cross, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Very visceral.
Yeah.
But nearly all of the focus is on the physical pain. And in Matthew, equally visceral, but almost none of the focus is on the physical pain. It's all on the wrath of God coming on this one man, Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
So how do we understand the term wrath?
Well, it's interesting that we've come to wrath in the context of sorrow rather than anger, actually, isn't it? And I do wonder if there's something to that. I mean, Jesus does get angry, and we do see anger. I mean, even the last one, Matthew 23, and the cleansing of the temple. But we have come to it from a sorrow point of view, but it's like God's. I almost want to move away from emotion language altogether. It's like God's fixed displeasure, God's incompatibility with being able to, with any unrighteousness.
Yeah.
It's like, oil and water can't mix.
Yeah.
Holiness and unrighteousness cannot mix, and therefore at the frontier of that is this thing called the wrath of God. We got this quote here from John Stott. He was a great Anglican vicar in the last century. And he wrote, it was not so much emotion as God's deliberate no to all that it's wrong.
Yeah. So when you think of wrath, you might have in your head like a clenched fist, ready to how could you do that? Shouting. But more, John Stott suggesting that the wrath of God is like a parent holding the head of an angry child, saying, "No, don't run out of this room and attack your sibling, or don't run across the road even though you're angry." It's a deliberate no. That's much more the image we've got. Much more the image we've got. Yeah. And so for that reason, if I'm really angry with you and I'm I guess what you can do is just think, I'll just give him a cooling off period and then we'll all be okay.
Yeah.
Or you could maybe try and do something to win me through my emotions.
Yeah.
But the thing that is so intimidating about the wrath of God is it's a considered, deliberate no. And you just can't get away from that.
Yeah.
I've done things that God just deliberately and continually says no to. And I can't kind of bribe him. I can't change his mind I can't just give him a cooling off period. It's just, there is a reality that I, as somebody, or, Jesus actually is the one who's like, there is just a wrath on him that he can't shake off.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like a lump of concrete that's just put on him. Like you just can't get out from under it.
Yeah.
And the only way of getting out from under wrath is death, which is what Paul talks about in Romans. The wages of sin is death. So Jesus is drinking this thing. He's like, as I'm taking this in, I know that this is basically me getting buried in this cave. This is the concrete block coming on me. Mm-hmm. This is the deliberate no to all that people have done, everything that's wrong, that's God's just opposed to. He can't. It's like the oil that he cannot have in his world because his world's water. It's like it's just coming on him. It's like, I know what this leads to. There's no way out.
Yeah.
And so wrath comes on him, and death in that term isn't so much the physical pain, isn't so much physical suffering, but wrath. Death that comes from wrath, which is actually what all death comes from, is a total removal of God. You're just totally and utterly absent from God for all eternity. Everything of life, everything that's good, everything that He is for, you're just away from, and that's where wrath takes you.
And is that why we get to the cry? Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani, my God, why have you forsaken me?
Yeah.
Because the experience was of being forsaken.
And it's utterly forsaken. It's a deliberate thing that cannot be negotiated, cannot be changed. It's just, you have utterly gone to the place where God is entirely removed from you in every single way.
Yeah.
And that is a horrific vision of death.
Yeah. I mean, even as we're talking now, this isn't stuff that we're particularly comfortable with or like to dwell on. And we've come up against things like this a few times in the New Testament journey, and there is an element of, hey, do you know what? This book just confronts us with what is, whether we like it or not. And the kind of idea that reality will somehow conform to my preferences is probably fairly delusional. But
yeah, I guess I wouldn't want us to pause too long at this point, because this is like, okay, this is the Good Friday thing. Like, there is no end other than death to wrath.
Yeah.
But of course, that's not where this gospel ends, and that's where we must never end.
Yeah.
Because it is utterly hopeless.
Yeah.
And I think what we can do is like keep moving the narrative on. Like we should feel that. We should feel that. But that's not where it ends. That's never was where it was going to end. It was never the intention of God.
I suppose I just wanted to kind of if we can provide any help to the Christian who's like, I just can't bear the idea that God bears wrath.
Well, I think, as you've said, a phrase that you've used that I love is it's sometimes good just to get out of your century.
Mm.
So, just step back and you kind of look like for actually, it kind of makes a lot of sense to sometimes just choose to put on the glasses other people wore. And in a world where you're much more used to evil being up front in your face, which I admit many of us are actually now, but you're faced with somebody who's bringing just utter evil towards you, and you're like, surely there should be some justice in the world. Yeah. Surely, like, something must be stopping this person from just bringing this towards me. And the alternative to no wrath is anybody can just do what they want. Unless you're strong enough to stop them, they will bring it. And God's deliberate no is to say, well, those rapists, those serial abusers, those people who've gone round and just pursued their own agenda, the strong on the earth, like, will in the end receive what they receive upon their own heads what they stole from others. Right? There is a hope attached to wrath for the victim, for the oppressed. It's like somebody's going to step in and sort this out one day.
Yeah. So
there is a hope there. So you kind of, in our century, in our day, we're so used to actually not having those people over us, abusing us. Many of us, if we've grown up in a kind of the privileged position of being in the West and in relatively affluent families, we're not used to that. So we don't see it from that perspective. But if you've been on the receiving end of all kinds of stuff, wrath is really good news.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Because you haven't got it in you to stop them. But there's a God who has not only got it in him, but he said deliberately for all eternity, I will come against this and I will bring it to an end.
Yeah.
So maybe that helps.
Yeah.
But I guess what we could pull out of this, because I think it is, we want to move the narrative on, but at the same time, I think I've had moments when I've just looked at how bad things are. And I thought, well, at the end of the day, God himself did have to die. Yeah. Like, there is a reality of, there is a big problem in this world that isn't solved by a simple fix. And I'm so used to, my phone's run out of batteries, I just plug it in and in like 30 seconds I can switch it back on.
Yeah.
Or I'll just, phone this person and tell me what to do, I've got a problem. Yeah. We quick fix, or if we could think, can't we, if we just go and buy a replacement. And so we can come so often to the reality of evil and trouble in the world. I think there must be just a quick fix.
Yeah.
There must be like an easy answer here.
Yeah.
I think when I went through a stage where I was really conscious of gossip. I found myself just saying things about people behind their back. So my first answer was like, I'm just going to stop. I just won't do it anymore.
Yeah.
And then I found myself like a few weeks later being like, oh man, like I realised I've just slagged that person off behind their back. Like, it's not there's no quick fix to some of this stuff.
Yeah.
If you know anybody with an addiction, you'll know it's not an easy, you can't just sort of say, hey, just stop.
Yeah.
Or take this pill, or pray this one prayer. Now, there's just a reality that there's no quick fixes for so much stuff, because sin is such a massive problem. Yeah. God himself had to die and be overwhelmed to the point of death with so much sorrow. That's how big the problem is.
Yeah.
And so it should lead us to this place of utter powerlessness, really.
Yeah.
Like, this utter power, like, oh my goodness, we are, and that's called repentance.
Yeah.
there's a problem in my life, in our world, and we haven't got what it takes to deal with this. Oh God, please help. And that's one of the most, for what we've said about the Vineyard movement and the tradition, which is true, John Mumford used to say over and over again, the most important prayer that any of us could ever pray is, oh God, help. And that's it.
Yeah. It's multi-layered, isn't it? Because there's comfort for those who are like, when is anybody going to do anything about this injustice in the world? And there's also challenge to many of us who are kind of more probably in the position of, oh, sin's no big deal.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah.
And these chapters, these narratives kind of say, well, this caused God to die. So it's bigger than you think. But of course, moving the narrative on.
We could get a few whips and things, but let's push it on.
The cross at its heart is also the greatest demonstration of love and his commitment towards his people, isn't it? It's just absolutely wonderful, and it sparked a gazillion talks, everything. It's the ultimate demonstration of love, and it's I always have these feelings about the gospel narratives that there is a part of me that's like, oh, I wish they'd given more papyrus to the earlier parts of his ministry. There's parts of Jesus' ministry and life we don't know anything about, but the fact that they all major on the Passion Week and they give so much airtime to that suggests to me like this is love at its highest form and its most clear portrayal.
Yeah. And so for all the suffering that Jesus goes through, the fact that he would be overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death and then carry on for my sake, for your sake, it's like, if he'll go through that for us, nothing's going to cause him to pull back. A regular thing, isn't it, that as Christians we feel we've done something that would cause Jesus not to want us to be with him anymore. Like we've sinned in a way, or we've failed again on the same thing, or done so, whatever it is. But he went to the cross for you.
Yeah.
Like he was at that moment where he actually thought, I think I might die because of the amount of just overwhelming sorrow that I'm taking into myself. Do you know what? I'll just crack on.
Yeah, I'll do it.
I'll do it.
Yeah.
So when he looks at your sin, this isn't to diminish sin or failure, or it doesn't diminish that in any way, but when he looks at that, that's nothing for him to press on through and to continue with you than it would be for him to face his own death and say, I'll continue.
Yeah.
So it gives us great comfort, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And, many Christians over the centuries have kind of given the exhortation, preach the gospel to yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like you got to keep knowing this stuff, and it's part of the kind of why we set up the institution of the breaking bread and taking the Lord's Supper, isn't it? It's just every time you meet together, do this in remembrance of me. This is what you need to keep putting yourself in front of. Yeah. This is what you need to keep bringing yourself before. We never graduate beyond it. We never move into some other realm. We've, as a church, kind of opened up a little bit to kind of in a healing prayer and things like that. And even that, like in the depths, well, where are we going to get the power from? What's actually going to shift the thing? It's the blood of Jesus shed on the cross, isn't it?
Oh, it's amazing stuff. Amazing stuff. So there's so much in that, but let's jump on to this next little tiny quote.
Let's get into Matthew 28, yeah.
Because we need to. We can talk about this stuff forever, but I find this one of the greatest single things in the entire Bible, to be honest. Right, so if you picture the scene, Matthew 28, verse 9. We spoke about Jesus being understated earlier. Mm. Jesus has been betrayed by Judas. All of his disciples have left him. and kind of denied him or whatever. He's been whipped, tortured, convicted, crucified. He's like shouted out, "You've forsaken me." He's died. Nothing happens the next day, Saturday. Sunday morning, chapter 27 or whatever it is of Matthew, Jesus barely says a word. He says like one or two things on the cross, that's it. Barely says a word. Silent, dead. And then you're like, what's his first thing that he's going to say? Like, he's died, he's shouted out, "Why have you forsaken me?" He's like, we're waiting for like, he's going to say something really, really amazing now. Like, he's just like, he's going to come back to the disciples and it's going to be so overwhelming. Like, he's going to just pour truth out of his mouth. He's going to like, "Yeah," or "I told you so," or "Here I am, guys." Like, woohoo! Like, what's he going to do? And in my head, I'm like, it's going to be the most epic moment of the entire gospel. He's died, he's resurrected, he comes to his disciples and it's like, yes! And then when he go, "Greetings." It's just like, what? So, Jesus' first thing he says, he's been dead. A whole, 3 days in the grave. He's been dead. They're all all over the place. They've given up. And his first thing he says, "Greetings." You're like, so I just find that absolutely, mind blowing that he would just kind of, as if he's just gone out to the shops and he's popped back and he's like, "I know, all right."
It's not Hollywood, is it? It's not Hollywood at all. So, why? What's behind that? What are we to make of that?
Well, this is what, it was so incredible about Jesus, right? So Jesus is the first and at this point only person, as in at this moment you're watching this, the only person who's been really truly resurrected. Others have been resuscitated, but he's the only one who's truly been resurrected. He's the first fruits of what will happen to all those who follow him. So he's really doing this utterly unprecedented, miraculous, amazing thing. And he could go on and on about what he's doing and what he's done.
Yeah.
But this just speaks so much volumes for his character, because what he does, he just says "Greetings," as in, "I greet you." It's not about him. Even when he's been resurrected, Jesus' attention and his focus isn't about him. It's about you. All right. And so that's the first thing. There's no ego.
What have you been up to?
Yeah. No ego, no promotion. Can you imagine if somebody's gone off and done the most, Harry Kane captains England to win the World Cup, comes back home and he's like, "Hey, how was your day?"
Yeah.
There's no ego, there's no self-promotion. Jesus shows that he's really for us. He really is interested in you. In every moment. He just is, he wants to greet you. And this is just a massive moment for me, was when I realised Jesus is actually just interested in me. He isn't coming on some ego trip. This isn't trying to make me follow a religion or do certain things. He's interested in me. And when he comes to me, he comes for my sake. He's not really got an agenda other than, hey.
Yeah.
And it's just the most glorious and wonderful thing. And it's reminiscent of course, God in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve when he just walks with them.
Yeah.
I wonder if you know that. Jesus is just, he doesn't come with a long list. He doesn't come with an agenda. He's just come and say, "Hey, I'm interested in you." And I just think that's the most wonderful thing of our God.
Yeah. Yeah. Often pointed out, and rightly so, I think, the interesting thing about it was the women who Jesus appeared to first. And again, we talked about these as kind of founding documents of the Western civilization. But there's a lot in that fact that, you can go down the apologetics route. That's not how they would have written it if they were trying to make it up. They weren't considered reliable witnesses, but it was the truth of what happened. But it does... There's been a lot of weight put on it, but I think rightly so, of Jesus comes first to the women. He commissions them as the first witnesses of the resurrection. And that's an incredible thing to have done at that time in that place.